I stepped through the doorway and froze. My mother's voice echoed down the hall, smooth and rehearsed, as she stretched out her arms and guided my sister-in-law through the rooms like a tour guide. The polished hardwood floors caught the light, the walls smelled faintly of fresh paint, and every corner of the house carried the weight of years of sacrifice. Yet here she was, claiming it with a smile, as if she had built it herself. My chest tightened as I watched her gesture toward the dining room and speak of family dinners, her words slicing through me like they belonged to a life I had not lived. My sister-in-law drifted into the kitchen, twirling slowly, her eyes glowing with pride as if the marble counters had been hers all along. My mother's laugh rose above it, light but hollow, and I stood in the silence, invisible in my own home. I thought of the nights I had slept in my car, the extra shifts, the empty plates I had pushed away so I could save another $1. Their voices dripped with ownership while the truth pressed against my ribs, daring me to say something, daring me to break. But I did not. I let the scene play out, watching them walk across the floors I had earned with sweat and loneliness. My lips curved into the smallest smile, not of joy but of certainty. They believed they were taking something from me. They had no idea what I was about to do. This was not the story of a house. This was the story of how silence would become the sharpest weapon I had ever held. My mother glided through the living room as if she had designed every inch of it. Her hand swept across the air, her voice filled with pride as she told my sister-in-law how perfect the backyard would be for family barbecues. The glass doors reflected her smile like it belonged there, and I stood in the shadows, silent, watching the woman who had never spent a single dollar on this place present herself as its owner. My sister-in-law followed her eagerly, brushing her fingers across the counters, opening closets, tilting her head toward the high ceilings as though she had just stumbled into her inheritance. Their laughter rang through the hall, light and careless, but inside my head the sound cracked something sharp. I thought of the endless nights stacked on top of one another, running from one job to the next, collapsing in a parking lot to steal an hour of restless sleep. I remembered curling up in the back seat of my car with the windows fogged, clutching a bag of cheap food I could barely afford. I remembered empty cupboards and skipped meals, all for the promise that one day I would sign my own name on something solid. Every word my mother spoke mocked those years. The house smelled of fresh paint, but beneath it I could smell sweat and exhaustion, memories sealed into every nail and beam. I wanted to speak, to remind them of the bank statements and the down payment made from my hands, but the words never left my mouth. I let them take their tour, nodding at a dream they had not earned, because silence felt heavier than any argument. When they finally left, I walked each hallway slowly, touching the walls as if reclaiming them with my fingertips. That night, under the yellow porch light, I slid a new lock into place. The sharp click echoed louder than their voices, a sound that cut the past away and sealed the door on everything I would never allow back inside. The next morning, my phone lit up with missed calls stacked on top of each other. First came my mother's voice, sharp and impatient, accusing me of embarrassing the family and acting childish. She demanded the key, insisted the house was never mine alone, and left her anger ringing in my ears long after the message ended. Then came my father, his voice soft and calm, but carrying a pressure that pressed harder than hers. He spoke of unity, of families sharing everything, of traditions that could not be broken, but his words felt less like comfort and more like a leash being pulled tight. Last was my sister-in-law, smug and rehearsed, her tone dripping with certainty. She said everyone knew my mother had paid for the house, that keeping it to myself was selfish, and that I was only proving I would always be the outsider. Her words almost made me laugh, because I still remembered when they had laughed at me for being broke, for juggling 3 jobs, for failing classes because I had fallen asleep in lecture halls after overnight shifts. I remembered my brother joking at family dinners that I would never own anything, my mother nodding in agreement while my father stayed silent. Those memories now collided with their sudden desperation to claim what they once mocked me for chasing. The contrast was almost satisfying. For years they had told me I was not enough, that I would never succeed, and now they clawed at a door I had locked with my own hands. The house was no longer just walls and beams. It had become a fortress built from my hunger, my exhaustion, my persistence. I scrolled through the home security app and replayed the footage of my mother welcoming them in as if she held the deed. Her smile glowed on the screen, her words captured clearly, undeniable. For the first time in my life, I felt the shift. I no longer had to argue with them. I had evidence, and evidence would speak louder than their voices ever could. By afternoon, the sound of fists on wood rattled through the front door. Their voices rose outside, a storm of commands and accusations, but I stayed seated by the window with a cup of coffee warming my hands. I watched the steam curl upward as if time had slowed, letting their shouts fade into the background. The house felt different now, not a place they could walk through at will, but a shield that answered only to me. Every bang on the door reminded me of nights I had stood on the outside, begging for recognition, waiting for scraps of love that never came. The memory pulled me back to childhood dinners where my words were brushed aside like crumbs. I had tried to share stories from school, only to be drowned out by louder voices. My achievements were small jokes, my failures repeated until they stuck. Back then, silence meant invisibility, and I wore it like a punishment. Now it wrapped around me like armor, each quiet second a refusal to bend. I sipped my coffee and let them rage, knowing that my stillness unsettled them more than shouting ever could. When their pounding turned to pleading, I reached for my phone, not to answer, but to scroll through the saved security clips. The images played across the screen, my mother smiling as she welcomed them in, my sister-in-law spinning in my kitchen, my father nodding approval. It felt almost poetic that their own pride had left a trail they could not erase. With a few taps, I sent the files to my lawyer, his steady voice already forming a plan before the day ended. He reminded me to document everything, to keep every voicemail, to let their desperation build its own case. For the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I was no longer the daughter who cowered or the sister who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had truth captured in images and sound, and I had the law on my side. Their words might twist, but the evidence would not bend. Silence was no longer a cage. It was a choice, and with it I finally held the kind of power they could not touch. Their car pulled into the driveway with the sound of tires grinding against gravel. My mother stepped out first, dressed as if she were arriving for brunch rather than battle, her shoulders straight and chin lifted high. She pointed at the door with a sharp gesture, her voice commanding me to open it and hand over the key. Her words carried no hesitation, only the certainty of someone who believed control was her birthright. My sister-in-law followed behind her, a designer bag slung across her arm like a trophy. She laughed as she glanced at the windows, mocking me for hiding inside, and said the house should have been theirs all along. The sound cut through me but did not shake me. I steadied my phone in my hand, recording each movement, each smirk, each accusation. Their faces tightened as they noticed the lens catching them, yet they did not stop. My brother lingered by the car, jaw clenched, eyes locked on mine with a look that promised trouble. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped low, warning that if I refused to give them the key, they would make sure the whole family knew what kind of person I really was. He took a step forward, trying to tower over me, but I did not move. Instead, I angled the phone, capturing every inch of his threat, letting the silence stretch heavy between us. The more I stayed calm, the more restless they grew. I lifted the screen and pressed play on a saved clip. The image of my mother opening my front door filled the space between us, her voice clear as she announced it was our home. My sister-in-law appeared twirling in the kitchen, my brother nodding in the background. The color drained from their faces as the evidence played back in real time. I lowered the phone slowly, my voice quiet but firm, telling them their threats no longer held weight. The locks had changed, and so had I. In that moment, the power shifted, and for the first time they understood that my silence was not fear. It was proof that I had already won. That night, I gathered every clip, every voicemail, every photo of their faces pressed against doors that no longer opened for them. With a steady hand, I sent them to my lawyer, who filed each piece with precision, his voice calm when he told me the case was stronger than they realized. I blind copied the neighborhood association and slipped the same evidence to a local reporter who had long suspected that the perfect image of my family was only a mask. The act was quiet, almost simple, but it carried the weight of years of humiliation finally placed in the light. By morning, the ripple had begun. The group chat of neighbors buzzed with whispers, screenshots spread through phones, and the article hit the paper by evening. "Prominent family accused of fraud and harassment," the headline declared, stripping away the glossy reputation my mother had polished for decades. My brother and his wife, once smug, were now painted as greedy opportunists. My mother, once so proud of appearances, was called out as a liar. The collapse was swift, but I felt no need to cheer. Watching them unravel was not revenge, it was justice unfolding on its own. For the first time, I did not carry their shame, I did not carry their words. The burden had shifted, and I no longer needed to explain myself. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the sunrise painting the sky in colors I had almost forgotten. The street was quiet, the locks were secure, and the air felt light in my lungs. I leaned back in the chair and let the stillness sink in, not as emptiness, but as peace. The house was mine. But more than that, so was my life. I no longer needed to fight them. I had already won by standing still. I no longer think about the nights when I begged for approval or the days when I carried their words like stones on my back. Those moments lost their power the same way shadows vanish at sunrise. What matters now is the clarity that comes when truth finally stands on its own. I learned that truth does not need to shout to destroy lies. It only needs to be steady, patient, and undeniable. The strength I found was not in anger, but in refusing to bend, in holding firm until their own actions revealed who they truly were. If you have ever faced manipulation or been told you were not enough, know that silence and evidence can speak louder than any storm of words. Share your story in the comments because someone out there might need to hear it today. And if stories of resilience and justice matter to you, subscribe for more voices that refuse to stay in the shadows.